Hello, my name is Jeremy Helgevold. This is my submission for assignment 9.1, the Teachback for AI. Um, so my approach was to rely on Unity's physics engine as much as I could for trigger overlaps and colliders and being within range, and to try to write as little of that in my own code as possible. Um, I just figure the physics engine is better at it than my code will be. So I wanted to approach it from that direction. So first of all, an overview of the project I set up. It just has an enemy object, the red, with a direction, the player, which is green, and a wall, which just provides a visual block. The project is set up so that the player can move the green dot with normal WASD keys, and the enemy can see the player if they are in front of them with nothing blocking, and they can hear the player if the player presses spacebar to fire and they're in range. So I'll just demonstrate it here before getting into the code. So the player can move around. They're inside the view frustum, but it's being blocked. There's a question mark. But if the player moves out close enough without the wall in the way, and it turns into an exclamation point. And then if they're just not anywhere, neither goes. So I can move the wall here, and you can see that the view angle is cleared. There's no obstruction. So first off, the player has a rigid body, so that collisions and triggers will be reported to it. It's just got a normal circle collider, and it's got the player controller script. Player controller script has a sound level variable that's editable, and I just set that to 5, and it's got a layers mask that I set to enemy, and I'll show you what that does here right now. So the player controller script, this is just the controller, the movement code. It does very little. It will, when the spacebar is pressed, it calls fire noise. What fire noise does is use the physics 2D overlap circle function, which will create a circle around the player in this case, and the size of that circle is determined by the sound level. And it can be set against specific layers, so it doesn't test collision against unneeded objects. So that's why I made a layer mask public, and I set it to just test against enemy. And so all of this does is give you the colliders of anything within that circle that match this layer. And so since I'm only testing against enemies, I know that that enemy will have what's called an enemy listener on it. And that enemy listener contains a method that I can call to let it know that it needs to listen for a sound that was just fired off. And I pass it the transform so that it can tell if it's close enough. So the enemy listener is just very simple. This is on the enemy object. It's got a public hearing range so that you can control how well the enemy hears separately from how loud the sound is. And it just checks that the absolute value of the distance is less than hearing range, and that is the positive response for hearing it. And in the case of my demo, I just instantiate an ear on the enemy just to indicate that it's heard something. And I can demo that right now. So if I hit space, it finds that I am close enough to hear that, but if I go over here and hit space, it is too far away. This is, yep, it's too far away. Okay. So now the enemy vision is controlled by the enemy watcher script, and since this is just, this object just has a trigger on it, just so that objects can go in and out of it without moving. All I really do here is, if it's on the trigger stay function, I make sure that it's a player by checking the layer. And then all I do is cast a single ray towards the location of whatever came in. And I make sure to check that that's also the player, so that I know that I didn't first hit a wall, for example, or something else that would block my vision. And if I did not, then that's my positive visual feedback. Otherwise, something's in the way. And all this code is doing is making sure the exclamation point and question mark points show up and go away correctly. But this is pretty much all of the code needed to figure out if you can see another object. Um, so that's pretty much it. That was my approach. I wanted to use triggers and automatic uh, event notifications to do as much of the heavy lifting as I can. I don't know if this is easier than what was in the lecture, but I thought it was different and maybe is a little more scalable. If anybody has any questions about this, just feel free to leave questions about it below my submission on the discussion board. Thanks. Bye.